Hey guys, we're going to continue on with the executive branch. With the first lecture video, we looked at the qualifications for president, some of the responsibilities or duties as presidents, what you think of whenever you think of the presidency, some of the amendments, which we're going to hit later, and how the framers, the delegates at the Constitutional Convention, wanted a limited government or a limited president. And in class, we looked at Federalist Paper 70, and we answered some questions from it and why one president with limited powers was best. Like I said, we looked at the qualifications, the duties, and this is the last slide we had, the presidential powers and how they are limited by other branches. The Senate has the power to confirm presidential appointments, and the president can be impeached by the House of Representatives. There's other powers that the president has. We know there's specific powers that's specifically listed in the Constitution, but there's also this gray area. And the gray area really starts off with the very first line of Article 2. The executive power shall be vested in a president. Well, what the heck is executive power? What does that mean? And what does that mean? It means that there are powers that the president has simply because he's the president, that he's in charge of the executive branch to enforce or carry out the laws. And these inherent powers, they're not specifically listed, but the president has them. And most people would agree that the president has the power to do these things. It's natural. Just like we talked about inherent powers with the federal government, powers that the federal government has just because, like the power to communicate and talk with other nations. It's kind of obvious that the federal government would have the power to talk with other governments. It's kind of understood, for the president, that he has the power to spend money not authorized by Congress during wartime, during an emergency, that the president has the power to declare a disaster zone and send in the National Guard to help out. Those are emergency powers. And we would all agree, or most of us would agree, that the president can do that. It's an emergency, that the president's in charge of the executive branch to carry out the laws. And sometimes those powers aren't specifically mentioned, but he has them. With the presidency, the Article 2 is actually quite short. If you were to print it out on a piece of paper, it'd be about a page or so. That's everything with the president, everything with the executive branch. And so there's a lot of unknowns that weren't in the Constitution. There's about 5 paragraphs that deal with the power of the presidency and their roles and responsibilities of the president. And so there are some things that Washington had to do. For instance, what do you call the president? Your Honor, Your Excellency. Washington said, no, call me Mr. President. That he is a common citizen, Mr. President, not Your Honor or Your Excellency, like you would the Pope or something like that. That he limited himself to 2 terms and how that was the tradition or custom. 2 terms, even though it wasn't in the Constitution until the 1950s, is when it went into effect, the 22nd Amendment that limited the president to 2 terms. Sorry, it was 1948, I believe. And that with the power to veto, that it should be limited, that Congress is the people. And if the people want this law, that president should defer to Congress. And in the 8 years that Washington was president, he only vetoed a bill twice, or he only vetoed 2 bills. And most presidents did that. They limited themselves to vetoing only things that were totally out of the norm until we get to Andrew Jackson. Then things change. And so there are some things that Washington had to do first to set these customs and traditions, to answer these questions that weren't answered in the Constitution. Now let's look at why and how these powers of the presidency expanded. We know that the founders wanted a limited government. Over time, things expanded, and let's look at these reasons now. What about during an emergency? Even John Locke, you remember him, the Enlightenment philosopher, social contract theory. If the government doesn't do what it wants, we toss them out, start a new government, all that. John Locke believed that presidents should have emergency power. I think he called it exceptional power. That, we needed decisions made now, and Congress would just be too slow. And every president, imagine this, every president has agreed with John Locke, saying the president has exceptional powers during crises. What about during a war? Or we get attacked? Well, we need an answer now. But only Congress can declare war. What do? Well, we give the president power to act on our behalf. There's been some economic issues. The stock market crash and the rise of FDR. He increased the power of the presidency. What are we going to do if there's a domestic crisis? What are we going to do? We need someone, and we always look to a strong leader. We don't want the president to say, sorry, guys, that's not listed in the Constitution as a power, so you're on your own. No, we want a strong leader. We want a president who can stand up, take charge, take the reins, and do something, even though it's not specifically listed as a power that he can do. How else have presidential powers expanded besides during the crises and emergencies? Maybe their popularity. Andrew Jackson, which we're going to be looking at more in class. He was a military general who became president. He was a very powerful chief executive, and probably because of his personality, that he was a man of the people, a man of the farmers, he was probably the most boastful, the most authoritative president up through him. He vetoed more bills than any other president. He fought Congress. He fought the judicial branch, saying, do it. I dare you. I'm the president. I'm in charge. And it really increased the power of the presidency, that he was the high point on presidential power. After he left office, it kind of died down. We had some people who weren't great presidents. In fact, the two presidents right before Lincoln, Pierce and Buchanan, are often ranked as the two worst presidents. And then we have Lincoln and the Civil War. And Lincoln did what he thought he needed to do to save the country. Even though it may have gone against Congress, even though he may have done things that were questionable, he did it. He goes, my job is to save the Union, and I'm going to do it. He suspended habeas corpus, the right to be brought before a judge. He jailed people that he thought were disloyal. He declared martial law in D.C. He had the police arrest people without a warrant. He took property from people to use for the war. He shut down the press, forbid them from printing things. All these things in a regular time period, we'd be like, oh, no, you don't. We have freedom of speech, freedom of press. We have the Fourth Amendment. You can't suspend the writ of habeas corpus. I have a right to go before a judge. You can't arrest me for my beliefs. But we let Lincoln out. We let Lincoln go. He's excused from these things, from these violations. You just can't do these things. But it was a national crisis. So he said, we let him slide on it. He did it in the name of saving our country. So during times of national emergencies, like Lincoln. And then we have, the world is changing. And sometimes we needed a strong president to stand up to other world leaders. Teddy Roosevelt is a prime example. The Roosevelt corollary: we are the world's policemen. Well, where in the world in the Constitution does it say that? Woodrow Wilson with World War I did some things in the name of advancing the nation or advancing the status of our country in relationship to the world. So Woodrow Wilson, FDR during World War II, he changed government and drastically changed the government. He broke Washington's tradition of serving 2 terms. He's the reason why we have the 22nd Amendment. And so what you see here, what we just went through, are reasons why presidents, or reasons how presidents were able to expand their power: emergencies, because of their personality and their popularity, a national crisis like Lincoln's in the Civil War, to advance our country in relation to other countries. Now let's look at, like I said, what I like to call what ifs, or what should we do? We're going to look at a couple of amendments. First Amendment, 20th Amendment. Before the 20th Amendment, the new president actually took the oath of office in March 4th. The 20th Amendment changed that. It changed it to January 20th. And this is easy to remember. And this is how I remember it. 20th Amendment, January 20th. Easy. You got it. This moved the presidential inauguration from March 4th to January 20th. It shortened what we call the lame duck period. Think about a lame duck. Can't do anything. It's worthless. It's going to die soon, or it's going to end soon. But what we had before the 20th Amendment is the president would lose the election in November, or he was term limited out, whatever. Not before the 20th Amendment, but you get what I'm saying, that the president's not going to be president after the election. But they still have November, December, January, February. They got a third of a year still left as president. Well, think about Congress. Congress is going to say, President, you're out of here soon, so we're not going to help you out. We're not going to agree to anything. It's out with the old. We're just waiting for the new. And so with the 20th Amendment, we shortened that time period from March 4th to January 20th. The 20th Amendment also says that Congress can set up a line of succession. What happens if the president and vice president both die? What do? Well, the Constitution says, well, if the president dies, the vice president takes over. Okay. Well, what happens now? What happens with the vice president's spot? If the vice president becomes president, well, who fills that spot? Well, we have answers now. The 1947 Presidential Succession Act assigns the order. And it actually assigns the order in which a cabinet position was created. So the earliest cabinet level positions: Secretary of State, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of Defense. Those are going to be the first ones to take over as president if the president, vice president dies. We have the Speaker of the House. And you think, why would the Speaker of the House be in there? Well, it's the people. It's the people's Congress. And with this law and with the 20th Amendment, they said, if the president and vice president dies, who would be the closest elected person? Well, it'd be the Speaker of the House. And then it goes to the President Pro Tem. Elected people, not just appointed or unelected people. And so they had some members of Congress fall in this line of succession. Then we have the question, what if the president gets hurt? What if the president has a stroke? He doesn't die. What do we do? Well, the 25th Amendment says if the president becomes incapacitated, can't do his job, then the vice president can temporarily take over. Or what if the president has to go in for surgery and it's a long surgery? Maybe it's 4 hours or 6 hours or 8 hours. So he's under anesthesia and we get attacked. What do we do? Well, we can't just wake the president up. He's in surgery. And so the 25th Amendment allows the president to temporarily hand over the power to the vice president. Then once the president is better, he takes back those powers. The 25th Amendment also provides an out. What if the president suffers from dementia and goes crazy, but he's not incapacitated, but he won't resign? What do we do? Well, if a majority of the cabinet members sends a letter to Congress saying that the president can't do his job, Congress can vote whether or not they agree. And if they agree that the president can't do his duty, he's out. Now, the president can send another letter saying, I am fit for duty, I can do my job, then they have to vote again. So it gets a little messy, but the 25th Amendment, simply put, allows the vice president to take over if the president can't do his job. There's all sorts of technicalities, which are pretty interesting. We're talking in class about it next week. But the 25th Amendment answers some of these questions that the Constitution left out. Let's move on to some powers. And with the powers, I have them divided up into different categories. So let's just go on and hit these. We have some formal powers. It's things that are specifically listed in the Constitution. The president can propose laws. He may recommend, he goes, hey, Congress, we should have this law. He's like the chief legislature. He can use his power, his authority as president to pitch these new ideas. He has the power of persuasion. He may say, hey, Senator so-and-so, I need you to do this for me. I need you to vote yes. We're a member of the same party. Or I may appoint you to a position in my administration. He has veto power as well. That's listed in the Constitution. That's actually in Article 1. So he can veto a bill. And we talked about this with one of the Federalist Papers, Federalist 73. And he can threaten to veto, which is almost as powerful. He goes, Congress, if you pass this bill, I'm going to veto it. So don't even waste your time. Congress is going to have to think, okay, the president's threatening a veto. What do I do? We might as, do we just go for pass it anyway and have the president veto it? Or do we change the bill so the president won't veto it? So the president can veto a bill, but he can also threaten to veto a bill, which is just as powerful. We actually had a law back in the 1990s called the line item veto. And the line item veto dealt with the budget. And this was a Republican Congress passed a bill saying that the president has the power to veto certain parts of the budget, to veto certain lines of the budget. So if the president said, no, we're not going to spend this much on, this bridge, exit out. So I'm going to approve everything else, but I'm going to veto these lines. The Supreme Court declared that unconstitutional. They said, oh, no, you can't just veto some parts of the bill. The Constitution says you can sign it or veto it or do nothing. It doesn't say you can sign some but veto others. You can sign it, veto it, or do nothing. Those are your options. So the line item veto was declared unconstitutional. As a side note, the governor of Missouri does have this power. He has the power to veto certain parts of the budget, and that's line item veto. The president has military powers. He's the commander-in-chief. We know that only Congress can declare war, but what about other things that don't lead up to war? Think about that. What about other military actions or military events short of war? Can he do that? Well, it's a little gray. It's fighting, so isn't that war? But if Congress doesn't declare war, can the president still do it? Then you have to think, well, the president's commander in chief, he's in charge of the military, so he should be able to do what he wants with the military, right? The War Powers Act that was passed at the end of the Vietnam War somewhat addresses this. We're going to talk about it more later. But the War Powers Act said the president has the power, has the authority to send troops up to 30, a couple months. And then he has to get Congress's permission to continue that military action. So the president can do something short term, but after that, Congress has to give its okay. A lot of people believe that the War Powers Act is unconstitutional because it violates the president's rights or powers as commander in chief. No president has challenged this yet, but a lot of people believe that if it's challenged, that it will be declared unconstitutional, that the president can do stuff as commander in chief. He's in charge. He has the power to do these military actions. But Congress has the power to declare war. You can see how this is a gray area. The president also has dealings with foreign affairs. He's the chief diplomat. He has the power to make treaties. He receives ambassadors. So when a new ambassador from another country comes to the United States, he receives them and accepts them. He also has the power to appoint ambassadors. The United States ambassador to England, or the United States ambassador to Canada, or Australia, or China. The president can make executive orders, which is, I have up here described as like a contract. It's an agreement between two people. It's not a treaty, so the Senate doesn't have to approve it, but this executive order is, it can die off, but just think of a contract, an agreement between two countries. Not a treaty, but just a contract. The president is also the chief executive, the executive branch. He's in charge of that. He's the chief administrator. He has, the executive branch enforces the law or carries out the law. So he has the power to do that. He has the power to fire Senate officials or fire officials that the Senate approved. We talked about that in class. The president can issue an executive order. An executive order is a directive. It explains, this is how I'm going to enforce this law. An executive order has the effect of a law because the president says, here's the law, and this is how I'm going to enforce it. This is how I'm interpreting this law, and this is how we're going to do it. Well, he's in charge with enforcing the law, so his executive order is kind of like the law. But it's not a law. It's an executive order. The president can also issue what we call signing statements. It's like an attachment. It's like, I'm signing this, and this is how I'm going to enforce it. This is what I believe the law means. Now, signing statements, they're fairly rare, and they're fairly a gray area. They're not law. It's not part of the law. It's just the president's opinion. But he's letting everyone know, I'm signing this, and this is what I think it means. Here's how I understand the bill, and here's how I'm going to enforce it. It's a signing statement. These don't happen very often, but like I said, it's a little gray area, but it's under the president's executive power. Here's how I'm going to carry out the law. The president also has a privilege. We can call it executive privilege, that the president doesn't have to turn over all information that he may have. That not everything that the president does should be allowed in the open, or should other people, other branches don't need to know about it. Now, this is questionable as well. Nowhere in the Constitution does it say presidents have the right to withhold information, but it kind of makes sense in one sense. Think about it. If the president wants honest, upfront information or opinions. Sometimes he has to guarantee privacy and secrecy. Well, if people know that anything they tell the president can be open to the public, open information, they may not give the president forthright information. And so things need to be held confidential. Just think if your friends were talking to you and you wanted advice from your friends, and you told your friends that, hey, if you tell me something in confidence, I may tell other people. Well, what are they going to do? They're not going to tell you the truth. They're going to tell you something that you want to hear. And so executive privilege keeps things secret. However, the Supreme Court has ruled with executive privilege, you can't hide or withhold information when it involves a criminal investigation. It can only be with the process, whenever you're talking with lawyers or whenever you're debating what should be done. So those internal conversations can be held secret or confidential. We call this executive privilege. And the president has to assert executive privilege. He has to say, nope, you can't have this information because it deals with confidential things. The president also has judicial powers. The president appoints judges. We know that. The president can also issue pardons. If you think about it, a pardon is a check on the judicial branch. The judicial branch says you're guilty and you're going to prison. President can say, nope, I'm undoing that with a pardon. The courts can say, oh, you're guilty, you're going to be sentenced to jail for 20 years. The president can say, nope, I'm going to commute your sentence. 10 years is good enough. So a pardon and a commutation are checks on the executive, they're checks that the executive branch has over the judicial branch. Amnesty is a general pardon to a big group of people. I'll give you two quick examples. One, after the Vietnam War, there was a lot of people who, what we call dodged the draft, that they didn't report to a military base after they were drafted. They skipped town in a sense. Jimmy Carter issued amnesty. He goes, all you people who dodged the draft, you're forgiven. You won't be prosecuted. A second example, some people want to give amnesty to illegal immigrants, people who came over and have lived here in the United States for however many years, law-abiding citizens, but they broke the law. They came over illegally. So the court, some people say, hey, let's give amnesty, this blanket pardon to all the illegal immigrants. Those are two examples of amnesty. And so in a sense, the president has the power to overturn a court sentence, a criminal court sentence. Now, this can only be done for federal crimes. If you get charged with stealing, a candy bar in Missouri, the president isn't going to be able to pardon you. Sorry. It's only for federal crimes. This wraps up the second video of the executive branch. If you have any questions, email me. What we're going to be looking at next is the president's team. So we're going to be looking at cabinet members and all that fun stuff. Our assignment that we're going to have dealing with this lecture video is expanding the powers of the presidency. How did the presidents go from a limited role to the most powerful man in the world? That's what we're going to be looking at next. Until then, have a good day. Talk to you later.